I was asked, as you may have read in the program, to speak about the place of ethical and value-based governance as a critical pillar in building strong families and stable societies. That was my brief. And we are looking at governance in the African context. You'll agree with me that there are many tales that have been told about Africa. In fact, whenever 2 or 3 Africans are gathered, there is a lament in their mouths. Whenever a story about Africa is told in the broadcast media, it is most likely on the negative side. The sad reality is that we have got so used to this that it no longer moves us. To the contrary, we get actually very surprised when somebody says something positive about Africa. Like Nathaniel, we think, can anything good come out of Africa? But the truth is that there is much potential in this continent that if we were to harness and exploit, can place our continent in the highest league of nations, if not beyond. But it is a big step that we would have to take, because the story of Africa will not change unless and until we make some radical adjustments on how we do things in this continent. What must we do then? Several paradigms have been proposed and presented as the antidote to our challenges. Let me mention a few. The first paradigm that has been presented as a possible solution to the troubles we face in this continent is what I call the education paradigm. As Africa moved into the new realm of political freedom just over 60 years ago for most of our nations, many of our founding fathers believed that one of the most critical pillars for building our nations and growing into the League of Developed Nations was education. Nelson Mandela once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And indeed, many of our countries have over the years prioritized education in their national budgets. Here in Kenya, the budget for education is the highest single component of our budget. Africa has not only raised the education levels of her people, but has also produced some of the top scholars in the world. But the question that I ask myself is, has education resolved our problems? The truthful answer is no. It would appear that as Africa becomes more educated, so also our problems have multiplied. The ills that our uneducated forefathers committed at very low levels, our educated leaders have perfected and taken to higher levels. Yet the good that those founders of our nations did has not been surpassed. Across our beloved continent, too many children walk dusty roads to broken schools. Too many mothers lie in clinics with no medicine. Too many dreams are extinguished by the weight of poverty. Yet, this is not because Africa is poor. Not at all. It is because Africa is being looted, looted by a few greedy, educated individuals who spread death to our people. Unfortunately, this looting is first facilitated by highly educated professionals, like the ones gathered in this room. My colleagues in the building industry, architects, engineers, lawyers, accountants, procurement professionals, human resource managers, medics, and the list goes on of professionals, are the chief architects of our troubles in this continent. Our education has given us highly professional looters. A Nigerian proverb says, when the roots of a tree begin to decay, it spreads its death to the branches. Therefore, as highly educated leaders and professionals have engaged in such corrupt practices, our children are growing up with a wrong perception that the primary purpose of education is to usher you into the place of privilege so that you can enrich yourself. Yet, as the Akan of Ghana have this powerful saying, a man who uses public property for private gain is like one who drinks water from the community well and then blocks it for others. The second paradigm that has been proposed to transform our nations is the paradigm that I call the legislative framework. There has been a belief that a strong governance structure backed by a robust legal framework will sort out the ethical and integrity challenges that we face in our continent. In fact, my brief for this session in the letter that I received was to help us examine how ethical and value-based governance serves as a pillar, a critical pillar in building strong families and stable societies. I was asked to explore the intersection between leadership, policy making, and moral responsibility, and to place special emphasis on how transparent, accountable, and people-centered governance can foster environments where families thrive. Let me declare at the onset that I am certainly the last person to underrate the importance of strong governance structures and the robust legal framework for combating corruption, upholding justice, protecting human dignity, and creating inclusive policies that prioritize family welfare. Yet, as I have served in the corruption industry for the last 2 years, I have come to the conclusion that whereas laws are important for setting standards for ethical living in any society, they have absolutely no power in producing people of integrity. It is amazing that most of the people that I deal with in the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission in our country, and as I've met with other people from across the globe, the most notorious corruption perpetrators are actually lawmakers and custodians of ethics and values. Why is this? First, because if we understand integrity, perhaps we can understand the limitations of the law. Janet Hasberg, a scholar in this field, defines integrity as a quality or state of being of sound moral principles honest, sincere, and upright. It is also a quality of being complete, whole, sound, and unimpaired. At the foundation of integrity is ethics. These are moral principles adopted by an individual or group to provide rules and standards for right conduct. Morality is therefore concerned with the relations between people and how they ought to behave towards one another in order to live in peace and in harmony. What we must observe here is that whereas ethics have to do with standards, including governance and legal systems, integrity, and this is important for me, has to do with personal principles. Therefore, when we say a man or woman is a person of integrity, it means that that person has made the personal choice to be honest, to be sincere, to be upright in all their dealings. Integrity, therefore, is often the outcome of several factors within the life and experience of an individual, which influences their moral actions, their ethical standards. And key among these are values, ethics, conscience, morality, and convictions. We do not have time to explore each of these, which in any case are very critical in ensuring that we are people of integrity. How do we practice, or how is the practice of integrity? The practice of integrity is an interplay of these factors that I have mentioned, where values and convictions form our foundational beliefs that influence an individual's conscience and ethical standards. When I have values that I stand upon, and I have convictions that are based on those values, it is almost impossible to move me from there. That's why you find a person like Joseph, who finds himself in a foreign land as a slave, but is confronted with a compromising situation. But he says, how can I do such a thing and sin against my God? Why? Because he had been taught values, and those values have become convictions, that even if he is alone in a foreign world, he was not willing or ready to depart. In fact, was ready to die for it. We find the same with Daniel. We find the same with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We find the same with several men and women outlined for us in scriptures. And we find them even in contemporary history. Men and women who have a conviction that is based on values. Those are the people who stand out for morality and ethics because they guide their behavior. So together, these concepts help to shape a person's character and to guide their actions in various situations, contributing therefore into a coherent and ethical life. And this interplay of factors has led to many models of making ethical or moral choices. Again, we do not have time to explore this. But let me share just one model. One of these interesting models is called the social intuitionist model. This is a psychological theory proposed by a psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. He observed and proposed that our moral judgments are primarily driven by intuitive, automatic, emotional responses rather than deliberate reasoning. Now, this may sound complicated, but it's very simple. What Janet is saying is that, contrary to popular opinion, our actions in any context, our moral reasoning is a reflective, rational process. It's not a reflective, rational process. Instead, it is influenced and shaped by the social interactions that we have around us. This means that our moral judgments can be so contagious that individuals are more likely to adopt the views and practices of those who are around them rather than what they know to be right. So that a common saying that we find around us, when somebody is doing something that is not right, but which is prevalent, if you ask them, why are you behaving this way? The most common answer is, everybody is doing it. In other words, my moral values and beliefs and convictions are not guiding what I do, but rather the society around which I find myself. The implication of this is profound. It means that if we are going to develop men and women of integrity, we must move from the mere rational education or legal threats. Instead, we must work on building a deeper reservoir of emotional sensitivity to ethics and morality founded on values and on principles. To this end, therefore, I want to propose a third paradigm. From education, from the legal framework, to a mindset strategy. Considering the constraints of educational and legal frameworks in fostering ethics and integrity, I wish to propose what I call the mindset strategy. What is mindset? Mindset is that set of beliefs, values, assumptions, and attitudes that guide one's perception and behavior. It is a set of lenses through which one sees the world. Whether in leadership or in personal life, mindset plays a crucial role because it shapes how one thinks, how one behaves, how one makes decisions, how we relate with others, how we respond to situations and challenges. So that if we are going to make a change, a transformation in our society, particularly as Africans, the Bible says in Proverbs 23 verse 7, as a man thinks, so is he in his heart. The implication is that the state of my mind will determine the direction of my heart. The things I value, the things I love, the things I hate. This will in turn then determine my conduct. Consequently, we can argue that leadership in Africa is shaped not only by political paradigms, legal architecture, or socioeconomic frameworks, but also by our mental pictures that our leaders bring into governance. I want to submit that many of the challenges we face in our continent today are the result of, first, our collective mindsets, but especially those of our leaders. What are the drivers of our African mindset. When you listen to Africans, whether in informal conversations or in high-level discourse in global platforms, several frameworks naturally manifest. Let me again mention but a few because we do not have time. The first is what I call the victim mindset. The victim mindset is a worldview in which we as Africans have continued to blame all our problems on the colonialist. Therefore, all our troubles, our poor performance, are all the consequence of colonialism. So when we do wrong things, when we behave wrongly, when we mistreat each other, it's because of the colonialist. Whereas there is no doubt that colonialism was a significant contributor to many of our sorrows. It cannot be that 60 years later, we are still blaming the colonialist. Think of your child who at 60 years old is still saying, you know, my parents. In fact, one time as a pastor, a man came to my office. It is rare for men to come for counseling, but this one came. I can count the number of men I counseled while I was a pastor, but I can't count the women. But this was one of them. So as he sat and he began to tell me his story, and he was lamenting how things are difficult and so on, finally, he said, you know, the problem was my parents. And they did this and they didn't do that and they didn't do the other and so on. And now you see, now I am an orphan. So I looked at him, I asked him, how old are you? He was 50 years old. And in my mind I thought, most 50 years old are orphans. So you cannot be 50-year-old and still lamenting of being an orphan. But he was blaming all his problems on his parents. And so Africans, we have continued to blame our problems on the colonialists. This is a mindset that we must debunk and recalibrate our thinking. And we must shift our thinking from this victim mindset to a self-determination mindset. Ngugi wa Thiong'o rightly pointed out that decolonization must begin in the mind. This means a mental shift from European paradigms towards indigenous ways of doing our things. End of quote. Speaking on the same, Steve Biko emphasized that liberation of the mind is a prerequisite for structural change. Why is this shift so important? Because it has been observed that colonized minds breeds inferiority. Therefore, a mindset rooted in African identity, pride, and sovereignty is essential for our moving forward and shaping our destiny. This victim mentality, combined with the inferiority complex that it brings, is what has led many of our leaders and fellow citizens to embrace strange ideologies that many times totally undermine some of our fundamental values and beliefs. And our two previous speakers have spoken so eloquently into some of these issues. Some of our civil society groups have become perpetrators of ideologies that they know well to be repugnant to our value system. And yet, because it is from the West and because it comes with funding, they are willing to sacrifice our values at the altar of money. No wonder Steve Biko again said, the most potent weapon in the hands of an oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Unless and until our minds are liberated, the foundation of our values will be consistently undermined by those people who come to sell us ideologies that are totally against our fundamental values, but come with proposals that we find difficult to refuse. An Igbo proverb says, if the lion doesn't tell his story, the hunter will. If we can't tell our story, somebody else will. So unless our minds are liberated, we will continue to buy into falsehood. Secondly is a scarcity mindset. This is another prevalent reality among Africans. A belief in limited capacity, opportunities, and resources. A common saying among Africans is that I must leave something for my children. Anybody say that? I am aware that the Bible says a good man must leave an inheritance for his children and his children's children. As a pastor and a theologian, I'm aware of that. But that verse does not say that you leave this inheritance at any cost. It is a belief in our mindset that resources are scarce while the future is uncertain. So I must get as much as I can when I can. This mindset is behind the scramble to amass wealth and riches whenever an African gets into position of leadership. It is this scarcity mentality that drives the rampant corruption that we see across our continent. The mindset of scarcity is demonstrated in even very simple things. Perhaps I shouldn't use this illustration, but maybe I should. If you go to a wedding or a party and there's a buffet and people are serving themselves, and the buffet is from there to there, with all kinds of foods, fruits, desserts, and so on. Many of us as Africans, and I'm one of them, will take everything from there to there. So that by the time they are going to sit down, the plate is so full and it contains everything: the chicken, the fish, nyama choma, ugali, rice, chapati, ice cream. They are all in that plate. And you ask yourself, why did somebody do this? It's because of that mindset that is telling you, if I pick a little and go and sit down, by the time I come back, there will not be anymore. So I better take it while I can. The sad thing is that many times, only 1/3 of that food is eaten. The rest is left on the plate. And that is what happens in our governments. That's what happens in our positions of leadership. We take whatever we can. If we find land, we grab it. If we find what, we take it. If we find what, because there's this mentality that I don't know what will happen when I retire. I better take whatever I can while I can. Scholars like Nkube argue for a paradigm shift from scarcity to abundance. An abundance mindset sees Africa's human capital, cultural assets, entrepreneurial spirit as key drivers of growth. And one of the things, therefore, we must work on as parents, as leaders, in every place, if we are going to change our continent, is to begin to inculcate in our children that there is enough to go around. You do not have to take everything. If you see them serving food, tell them, take a little, finish, and then take again. So that when they get into positions of leadership, they will not be the ones who are grabbing every little thing they find. By the time we put governance structures and we put the law in place, it will be too late. Because they'll be finding ways and means on how to circumvent the laws and how to go around the governance structures in order for them to get as much as they can. It's a mindset change. Finally, let me share this last mindset change. I call it the settler mindset. This is a worldview that is always satisfied with the status quo, such that as an African, we can live in squalor for years without being disturbed. What is troubling is that many African leaders are so tolerant of mediocrity that nothing troubles them about substandard goods and services. The reason our roads remain unrepaired, our government systems unresponsive, is because we are unperturbed by the mediocre. We as a people are uncurious. We do not explore the unknown. We do not easily embrace creativity and innovation. Therefore, as people are exploring outer space, we are still pounding fufu, and our children are still learning under trees. And it is not a problem. The truth is that Africa's complex socio-political landscape demands a leadership shift from this settler mentality to an adaptive mindset that helps us to be visionary and resilient. And therefore, it is our collective responsibility, if we are going to change our continent, that we begin to instill in our people, particularly our children, a spirit of excellence, a spirit that aspires beyond the current. We must help our children to know that there is much more to explore. You know, in the early days, there used to be a song, especially for us here in Kenya, which used to say, go to school and study hard. Because after you study, you will get a very nice job. So everyone in this country, I don't know about other countries of Africa, the moment you finish school, the next thing is you want a nice job. So a person can stay home, a graduate can stay home for 7 years waiting for that job. And I've sat in interviews and you ask a person, when did you graduate? 5 years ago. What have you been doing? I've been waiting for a job. We need to help train our children to be intolerant to mediocrity. I said that was the last, but you know a preacher finishes 3 times. So this will be the second last. Is my people mindset. A common phrase among African leaders is my people. This my people mindset is a highly divisive factor across Africa. This perspective to leadership is premised on the falsehood that when I ascend to a position of leadership, my first responsibility is to my people. Opportunities, resources must of necessity go to my people first. So that if I am a CEO of an organization, my organization will be populated with my people. Within a context of a very rich diversity of tribes, clans, and communities, the my people mindset has been the source and cause of many wars in Africa. A fight for leadership, resources, and opportunities. For us as Africans to enjoy peace as prosperity, we need to shift our paradigm to what our chair mentioned in the beginning as she gave her talk. My people must give way to collective mindset, the Ubuntu philosophy that says, I am because you are, and you are because I am. Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu are among leaders who practically operationalize Ubuntu in their governance systems. Scholars like Mbigi and Broodwick emphasize Ubuntu as a model for inclusive, empathetic, consensus-driven leadership. We must help our children to be socialized, to embrace this collective mindset in order to strengthen social cohesion and shared responsibility. As I was growing up, unfortunately, I was told of how that tribe eats people, and how that tribe are thieves, and how the other tribe are this, and how the other tribe was that. And as a young person, you know, because growing in the village, you only know your people. And so we believed it. Actually, I believed it. Until when I went to high school, to secondary school, and it was a national school that brought people from all over the country, different tribes and different clans. And I sat with these people and I realized they're just like me. I didn't find them with fangs like serpents, you know, with tails like what? They were just ordinary people like myself. And that totally changed my mindset. Now, even though in those days our fathers had not traveled and had not seen, it is unfortunate that we as parents are instilling the same kind of thing in our children today. So that our children are growing up again, believing that that tribe is bad, and that tribe is terrible, the other tribe is, and the other tribe is. So the national cohesion and continental cohesion that would help us to work together to build our nations and to build our continent is being ruined by the educated parents who are telling their children that the other tribe is bad. Romans chapter 12 verse 2 says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Renewal implies discarding the old ways and embracing the new. It means that we must change our paradigm on how we organize our families, how we train our children, how we help to build a new generation of leaders and of parents who will bring us together and make this continent the best that it can ever be. God bless you. Amen.